The first story vows on April 12, 1903, in the small town of Millfield, Ohio, Lucy and William were married in a small church. They promised to love each other, till death do us part. They didn't think much of their words, they were just happy to be married. After the wedding, they moved into a comfortable house on the outskirts of town and began a new life. At first everything was normal. William worked in the local mill, while Lucy tidied their house and tended a small vegetable garden. They went to church every Sunday and were friendly with their neighbors. But after a few years, strange things began to happen. In 1909, Lucy became seriously ill with pneumonia. Pneumonia was difficult to treat at the time. Most of the people who were attacked did not survive, and many in the town feared the worst. The doctor was certain that Lucy would die, and many of her friends and family came to say goodbye. But to everyone's surprise, Lucy quickly recovered as if nothing had happened. Some in the town thought it was a miracle, but Lucy and William were released and felt lucky to have survived the tragedy. A few years later, in 1914, William was involved in a terrible accident. He was working in the fields with a horse-drawn plow when the horse spooked him and threw him to the ground. William broke his neck and lay unconscious for hours before he was found. The local doctor told Lucy that William would not survive and she prepared herself for the worst. But just a few days later, William woke up and started walking, as healthy as ever. The doctor couldn't explain it, but William and Lucy didn't read much. They were just happy to still have each other. However, as time went on, people in Millfield noticed something strange. Lucy and William hadn't aged. By the 1940s, most of the people who had been their friends or family were old or dead. Lucy and William still looked much as they did in 1903. Their neighbors became suspicious. People whispered about them and wondered if there was anything abnormal about their marriage. Some townspeople shunned them, believing there was something strange or even cursed about the couple. Lucy and William felt a change in the way people treated them. Some friends stopped talking to them. Their lives became lonely and their marriage strained. The love they once shared was fading and replaced by frustration and confusion. They fought a lot, and Lucy became agitated. William retreated and became quieter. After decades of living together, the couple felt more distant than ever. By 1960, they decided to separate. Lucy packed up and moved to New York, where she worked as a writer. William stayed in Millfield, working odd jobs and keeping to himself. For years they lived apart, barely communicating with each other. Lucy struggled to find new friends, and William moved from one farm job to another. But no matter where they went or who they met, they felt an invisible attraction to each other. Every time Lucy tried to start a new relationship, something felt wrong, like she couldn't connect with anyone else. The same thing happened to William. He tried to move on, but he never felt comfortable with anyone. Each of them occasionally experienced strange aches or pains that they could not explain. They both began to wonder if their marriage vows were binding them in a way that they could not break. They did not understand it, but they began to suspect that the vow had caused something unnatural. In 1984, William wrote a letter to Lucy. He told her that he still felt connected to her even though they had been apart for over 20 years. He said he couldn't explain it, but he felt they were connected in a way he couldn't ignore. Lucy wrote that she felt the same way. She admitted that she too had difficulty connecting with someone and often thought about him. They both began to believe that their marriage vow somehow cursed them to be together, no matter how far apart they were. After years of exchanging letters, they agreed to meet again in 1992. When they finally saw each other, they were stunned. Neither of them had aged a day since their wedding in 1903. They looked as young as they had when they first married, while everyone around them had grown old or died. They realized that they might never grow old or die, and that they were somehow stuck in time. They decided to reconcile and accept that they were destined to be together forever, with promises they could never break. Over time and with deliberate effort, the two fell in love again. In 1995, Lucy and William wrote a book together. They called it Dating Advice from the Dead. The book is very hard to find now, but it was filled with funny and honest stories about love, disagreements, and staying together for too long. The book became a hit in their town. People loved reading it, even though it said nothing about the mysterious lives of Lucy and William. But some noted how the book offered advice that only someone who had lived a very long time could. At Millfield, Dating Advice from the Dead became more than just a book. It became part of family lore. People began giving copies to young couples on their wedding day with a simple reminder, remember, vows are everlasting. Over the years, the story of Lucy and William became a local legend. Some people claim to have seen the couple walking around town, looking as young as they did in old photographs. The strange story of Lucy and William remains unsolved to this day. Stephen's commentary on Camera, Me, segue story to the love line in the small town of Selby, Montana. People have been talking about a strange story for years. It's about an old phone booth that keeps popping up in random places. It always shows up in an empty field, on a deserted road, or in a parking lot at night. But this is no ordinary phone booth. People say that whoever calls from it will reach the one they feel is their true love. The first report of this strange cabin was in October 1978. Henry, a truck driver, saw it on Highway 56. He was lost and looking for directions. When he saw the phone booth, he was surprised and pulled into the middle. Henry tried the phone and dialed a random number, hoping to get help. But instead of instructions, the woman answered and they talked for a long time. They talked for 20 minutes, exchanging stories and dreams. Then suddenly the line disappeared. As Henry got back to his truck, he felt like he had met someone special. But after a few minutes he couldn't remember what they had talked about. He even forgot what his voice sounded like. Over the years, more people from Selby and other cities across the country told the same story. The booth was displayed in many places, including Ohio, Texas, and Washington. Each time, people said the same thing. They would find a booth, dial a number, and talk to someone who felt like a soulmate. But once the call is over, they forget everything they talked about. All that's left is a strong feeling, as if something important has been lost. Some people spend weeks trying to remember what they talked about, but it's as if their memory has been erased. In March 1985, a teacher named Laura found a kiosk near an old railway line on the outskirts of Selby. She called the number and the man answered. She felt so relieved talking to him, though she couldn't remember anything after that. A week later, he came back to look for the booth, but it was gone. There was no sign that he had ever been there. The mystery of the phone booth was growing. Sometimes it would not show up for months, then people would see it in 3 different states in the same week. The booth was rumored to be connected to a tragic love story in the 1950s. Some people said the young couple vowed to stay in touch even after death. But no one knows why the kiosk appeared or why it disappeared without a trace. One of the most recent stories happened to a man named Reggie in April 2012. Reggie was driving through Selby to attend a job interview in Great Falls. Later that evening, he stopped at a rest area on Highway 89 to stretch his legs. There he noticed a phone booth at the end of the parking lot. Curious, he went in and picked up the phone. He dialed a random number. The woman answered, feeling as if she had known him her whole life. Reggie talked to him for 20 minutes. According to him, there was a feeling that they had a strong connection. They were telling stories and he hadn't felt that way in a long time. But like the others, the call ended abruptly. Reggie got back into the car feeling empty. Before he sat down, he couldn't remember a single thing in the conversation. He tried to remember her voice, but after waking up it was like remembering a dream. Later, Reggie tried to tell his friend what had happened, but each time he explained it, his memory faded further. He couldn't remember the number he had called or the sound of his voice. It was as if the entire call had been erased, leaving only a faint sense that something important had been lost. Since then, more people have reported the phone booth in Montana and surrounding states, and sometimes even farther afield. No one knows where it will appear next or if it will ever be found. Some people try to wait for the booth to leave to see if it will return, but they are often disappointed. The booth seems to follow its own strange schedule, never staying in one place for long. Some say that the booth only appears to people who really need it, such as those who are lonely or lost. The phone booth has become something of a legend in Selby and other towns. It's called the Love Line, and people swap stories about it in local coffee shops and around campfires. Some say they hope to find someone one day, only to see who answers on the other end. But they know that even if they do find someone, they'll feel only a strange, empty feeling when the call ends. So far, no one has found a way to remember the conversation or who they spoke to. But everyone who has used it says they have felt a real connection with someone for a time. Stephen's commentary on the camera, Segway Story 3 Christmas visitor on Christmas Eve 1985 in Northwood, Wisconsin, an old man named Charles received an unexpected invitation. Charles lived alone and most of the townspeople didn't know much about him. He was quiet, white-haired, and always seemed a bit odd. He had no family and was left to himself. The Millers invited Charles to join them for Christmas dinner. The Millers, Richard, Mary, and their 3 grown children, were well respected in town. They were known for their generosity and often helped out at town events. Many thought they were being nice, especially during the holidays, when they invited people who might not be married. Charles was surprised by the invitation, but he was happy to go somewhere to spend Christmas. The Miller house was an old Victorian house on the edge of town. On Christmas Eve, Charles arrived at about 6:30 p.m. and was greeted by his family. The dining room was filled with lights and Christmas decorations, and the table was set with beautiful dishes and silverware. They put Charles in a large chair at the head of the table and said they wanted him to feel special as their guest. As dinner began, Charles noticed some strange things. The family served him food, but they didn't eat much. They watched him carefully as he ate, as if they were expecting something. At first Charles thought they were happy to see him enjoying his meal. But as he looked around, he felt a little nervous. The family didn't talk about anything ordinary like Christmas traditions or town news. They were focused on him, often looking at each other when they thought he wasn't looking. As they ate dessert, Charles grew more anxious. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and it seemed as if they were sealed off from the outside world. A fire was burning in the room, but the air was somehow cool. Something was wrong and he began to feel a strong sense of danger. Late in the evening, Richard left the room to fetch wine from the cellar. When he returned, Charles noticed a change in the family's behavior. They seemed even more excited and looked at him with a strange expression. As the glass was poured, he felt something strange as he looked at his reflection in the wine. Suddenly it hit him, he had been cheated out of this dinner for a reason he didn't understand, but it was serious. After that night, no one saw the family again. The entire town noticed their sudden absence. Rumors spread and people began to talk about what might have happened to them. The Miller house remained empty for several months. Then, in 1986, police decided to search the house. They went room by room, checking for any sign of the family or a qualified explanation for their departure. Nothing unusual was seen inside the house on the main floors. The dining room was still decorated, as if the family had just disappeared in the middle of the holiday. But when officers arrived downstairs, things took a disturbing turn. In the basement, police found a locked refrigerator and an old cabinet. The storage room contained dusty cardboard boxes and shelves filled with jars and cooking utensils. In some of these boxes, the police made a horrific discovery: human bones. Many of the bones had marks as if they had been cut or burned. It was unusual and disturbing. The police took everything they found to the laboratory for further investigation. After careful analysis, it was confirmed that many of the bones belonged to people who had gone missing in the area. Police began to suspect that the family might be involved in something sinister. They interviewed people in town to see if anyone knew anything about missing persons who might have been last seen near the Millers' home. Stories emerged of travelers passing through town who never arrived at their destination. Some of these missing persons were linked to the remains found in the house. This evidence painted a grim picture: the Millers may have brought these people into their home and never seen them again. As the investigation continued, police found more disturbing evidence. Behind the refrigerator, they found a small work area with knives and other tools they had recently used. They were also sent for testing, and several had traces of human tissue. All of this suggested that the Millers were secret cannibals who hid their crimes in the basement of their home. Investigators looked into the family's past, but found little to explain why they did this. There was no sign of anything unusual in the family's background. Neighbors described the Millers as friendly, generous people who often invited strangers to eat with them. But it now appears that this kindness was just a cover. Even stranger is the fact that the Millers have completely disappeared without a trace. They have found no notes, no letters, no trace of the struggle. It was as if the entire family had just disappeared. The people in town were scared and confused by the news. The Miller house was demolished because no one wanted to live in a place with such a dark history. Charles had also disappeared. He had no family and no record of where he came from. After a while, people mostly forgot about him. But his name came up as people talked about the case. Some believed Charles was the last person to see them. Then, in December 2000, Charles unexpectedly reappeared in Northwood. Oddly enough, he looked much younger. His hair was no longer white, but dark gray, and his face was smoother, with fewer wrinkles. People who remembered him were shocked. He looked to be in his 40s, not his 80s. Charles offered no explanation. He went back to his quiet life, as if nothing had happened. When people asked him about the Millers, Charles claimed not to remember them. He acted as if he didn't remember Christmas Eve. But people in town could tell there was something different about him that they couldn't explain. Some whispered that it wasn't Charles who went. The Millers were never found, and their disappearance remains one of Northwood's greatest mysteries. Charles continued to live alone in the town for some time, unchanged, until he left Northwood forever, never to return.
And so, the story ends. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button to receive all the stories. Like, share and rate the story in a comment. Thank you for watching.